September 6, 2025. The news cycle erupts with one line from Donald Trump. "We don't just defend, we fight, we win, and it's time to call it what it is, the Department of War." For 75 years, Americans have known the Pentagon as the Department of Defense. The name sounds safe, noble, restrained. It implies America never seeks conflict. It merely responds. But Trump's words tear that mask away. With one sentence, he challenges the language of U.S. military power itself, and language matters. Defense is passive. It says, "We protect when attacked." War is active. It says, "We strike, we dominate, we conquer." So what does Trump really mean? Is this a symbolic gesture meant to energize his supporters? Or a sign of how the United States could reshape its identity in the 21st century? Because make no mistake, the Pentagon has waged wars across the globe for decades, no matter what its name is. Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, each was fought under the banner of defense. What Trump suggests is stripping away the pretense and calling America's military what it has always been, a Department of War. Today, we'll uncover the forgotten history of the War Department, the political reason it was buried, and why Trump wants it back. We'll explore how this change could ripple through U.S. politics, alliances, and global strategy. And most importantly, we'll ask, would America be stronger if it embraced war openly, or would it push the world closer to chaos? Before we dive in, subscribe, because here, we don't just skim headlines. We dig into history to understand the forces shaping tomorrow. The idea of a Department of War isn't new. In fact, it's as old as the United States itself. When the Constitution was ratified in 1789, Congress created the Department of War to oversee the young republic's military affairs. Its purpose was blunt and unapologetic: to prepare, supply, and lead America's armies in war. No euphemisms, no soft edges. The founders knew survival in a hostile world required fighting power. For over 150 years, the War Department directed every major conflict in U.S. history. During the War of 1812, it tried to defend the nation from Britain's return. During the Mexican-American War, it oversaw campaigns that added vast new territories, including California and Texas, to the U.S. In the Civil War, Secretary of War Edwin Stanton coordinated the Union's massive mobilization, transforming the North into an industrial war machine. The name itself reflected reality. America was a nation that fought wars against Britain, against Mexico, against itself, and later against Spain. By the time of the Spanish-American War in 1898, the Department of War was managing global campaigns, helping push the U.S. onto the world stage as an emerging empire. In the 20th century, the War Department directed America through 2 world wars. In World War I, it drafted and shipped 2 million soldiers to fight in Europe. In World War II, it mobilized over 12 million troops, oversaw the production of tanks and bombers, and secretly managed the Manhattan Project, which created the atomic bomb. By 1945, the War Department was the single most powerful institution in Washington. It had taken America from a fragile republic to the world's dominant military power. But there was a problem. The very word war carried a new and terrifying weight. With nuclear weapons in play and the Cold War beginning, leaders feared that a War Department sounded too aggressive, too imperial. They wanted a softer image, one that suggested America sought peace, not conflict. And so, in 1947, the War Department was dissolved. In its place rose the Department of Defense. The mission didn't really change, only the name. Trump's call to bring it back forces America to confront that history. Was defense ever anything more than a convenient disguise? When the War Department became the Department of Defense in 1947, U.S. leaders presented it as a symbol of peace. America, they said, did not seek conquest. It only defended freedom. The name was meant to reassure both Americans and the world. But history tells another story. Just 3 years later, the United States was at war again, this time in Korea. North Korea's invasion of the South was real, but Washington didn't call it a war. President Truman labeled it a police action. Under that banner, the Department of Defense sent hundreds of thousands of troops across the Pacific. The fighting was brutal. Cities burned, millions of civilians died, and 36,000 Americans never returned home. It was war in everything but name. The same pattern repeated in Vietnam. The Pentagon insisted the U.S. was defending democracy from communism. But the numbers told a different story. 500,000 American troops deployed, entire jungles burned by napalm, more bombs dropped on Southeast Asia than in all of World War II. The Defense Department was not just defending. It was waging one of the most aggressive wars in history. And Vietnam wasn't the only example. During the Cold War, the Pentagon backed coups and interventions across the globe. From Iran in 1953 to Latin America in the 1980s, operations were justified as defensive, protecting freedom, securing markets, resisting communism. To the people on the ground, it looked like war. Then came the Middle East. In 1991, Operation Desert Storm drove Iraq out of Kuwait. It was framed as defending the global order. In 2003, the U.S. returned, claiming it was defending the world from weapons of mass destruction. Those weapons never existed, but the war lasted nearly a decade, leaving Iraq shattered. Meanwhile, in Afghanistan, the Defense Department led America's longest war. What began as a counterattack after 9/11 became a 20-year campaign of occupation and nation-building. By the time the last soldiers left in 2021, thousands were dead and trillions spent, only for the Taliban to return to power. Even today, the Pentagon carries out drone strikes in Yemen, raids in Syria, and patrols in the South China Sea. Each is justified as defense. Yet in practice, America is projecting force thousands of miles from its borders. This is the irony Trump points to. The Pentagon has been fighting wars for decades, but the word defense allows Washington to mask reality. America doesn't declare wars anymore. It declares operations, interventions, and defensive actions. Trump's call to restore the Department of War is an attempt to tear off that mask, to say openly what the Pentagon has been doing all along. But if America admits it, what happens next? Donald Trump's push to restore the Department of War is not just about nostalgia. It's a calculated move that fits his style, his politics, and his vision of America's role in the world. Why Trump wants war back. First, strength. Trump has always spoken in blunt, combative language. Where other politicians soften their words, he sharpens them. Defense sounds reactive, even timid. War sounds strong. It appeals to his supporters who believe America has been weakened by endless conflicts without victories. Second, honesty. For decades, critics have said the Pentagon hides behind euphemisms. Trump flips that into a weapon. By saying the quiet part out loud, he positions himself as the only leader brave enough to admit the truth. The U.S. wages wars, not just defense. Third, strategy. Words shape policy. By embracing war, Trump signals a more aggressive, proactive America. One that doesn't wait for threats, but confronts them head-on. Fourth, politics. Trump understands symbolism. The name change would dominate headlines, divide his opponents, and rally his base. Even if nothing else changed, he'd control the narrative. The world reacts. But the global reaction would be explosive. In Moscow, propagandists would celebrate, "See, America admits it's a war empire." Russia would use the new name to justify its own aggression, claiming NATO is the true aggressor. In Beijing, leaders would quietly smile. China already portrays the U.S. as destabilizing Asia. A Department of War would make that claim easier to sell across the Pacific. In Tehran, hardliners would rejoice. For decades, they've called the U.S. the Great Satan. A War Department would confirm every accusation, fueling anti-American militias and propaganda. Even in Europe, allies could grow uneasy. NATO has always sold itself as a defensive alliance. If Washington openly embraces war, European publics might question whether they want to be tied to America's campaigns. And across the global South, the change would reinforce suspicions that America is not a partner, but an empire. Escalation risk. The real danger isn't just propaganda, it's escalation. A Department of Defense has to explain why it's defending. A Department of War does not. By shifting the language, America lowers the threshold for action. Preemptive strikes, regime change operations, even full-scale wars could become easier to justify. At home. Inside the U.S., the debate would be fierce. Supporters would hail it as honesty. Critics would call it reckless. Congress would argue. Campaign ads would feature the question, "Do you support the Department of War?" Trump doesn't just want to rename a building. He wants to reshape how Americans and the world think about U.S. power. And if that shift takes hold, it could mark one of the most radical changes in American foreign policy identity in generations. Even without Trump's proposal, the Pentagon already functions less like a Department of Defense and more like a Department of War. The sheer scale of its reach makes that obvious. A global machine. The U.S. military maintains over 750 bases in 80 countries. It commands a budget larger than the next 10 militaries combined, around $850 billion annually. It deploys 1.3 million active duty personnel and oversees advanced weapon systems, from nuclear submarines to hypersonic missiles. This is not the profile of a purely defensive force. It is the infrastructure of global warfighting. In Ukraine, the U.S. provides weapons, training, and intelligence, shaping the battlefield even without formally declaring war. In the South China Sea, American carrier strike groups patrol contested waters to deter Beijing. In the Middle East, the Pentagon continues drone strikes in Yemen, special forces raids in Syria, and deployments in Iraq. Each action is justified as defense, defending democracy, allies, or global order. But in practice, these are offensive maneuvers projecting U.S. power thousands of miles from American shores. What a name change means. So, would renaming the Pentagon actually change its behavior? On the surface, no. The ships would still sail, the planes would still fly, the drones would still strike. The Pentagon would not suddenly gain new powers because of a sign on the wall. But language matters. Words shape identity, and identity shapes action. If soldiers, officers, and policymakers operate under a Department of War, the cultural shift could be profound. For the military itself, the new name could embolden a warrior ethos, embracing offense rather than pretending to defend. For policymakers, it could lower the threshold for intervention, making it easier to justify preemptive wars. And for the public, it could normalize conflict as part of America's mission, rather than an exceptional response. International consequences. Globally, the consequences could be even sharper. Allies might hesitate to join American-led operations if the banner is war rather than defense. Neutral nations could drift toward China or Russia, preferring partnerships with powers that at least claim to stand for stability. Adversaries, meanwhile, would seize the propaganda victory. Every U.S. strike could be portrayed as aggression from a self-declared War Department. The moral high ground Washington once claimed, shaky as it was, would erode. The reality check. At its core, Trump's proposal doesn't invent anything new. The Pentagon already fights wars. What the renaming would do is strip away the carefully built narrative that America's global campaigns are defensive, reluctant, or noble. That honesty might please Trump's base. It might even deter some adversaries. But it could also fracture alliances, fuel rival propaganda, and push the world closer to open confrontation. The Pentagon has always been a war machine. Trump just wants America to admit it. For more than 7 decades, America has lived under the banner of the Department of Defense. The name suggested restraint, nobility, protection. It told the world that the United States was a guardian, not a conqueror. But the record tells a harder truth. From Korea to Vietnam, from Iraq to Afghanistan, from drone wars to proxy conflicts, the Pentagon has waged wars again and again. The name defense has been a convenient shield, a story to make violence sound necessary, reluctant, even noble. Donald Trump's proposal to bring back the Department of War rips that shield away. It forces Americans and the world to face a simple reality. The U.S. military does not just defend. It fights. It dominates. It wages war. Would embracing that truth make America stronger? Some say yes. Brutal honesty could deter enemies, restore pride, and cut through the lies of past decades. Others say no. Admitting America is built for war could alienate allies, embolden rivals, and push the world closer to catastrophic conflict. Words are not just labels, they are signals. They shape how nations act and how the world responds. The difference between defense and war is not academic, it is existential. So now the question is yours. If the Pentagon returned to its old name, would the world be safer because America finally admitted the truth? Or would it be far more dangerous because Washington embraced war as its mission? Tell us what you think. Should the United States have a Department of Defense or a Department of War? And don't forget to subscribe, because the battles of tomorrow begin with the stories we tell ourselves today.